The rain fell in steady sheets against the cracked asphalt of a narrow back road in rural Pennsylvania. It was one of those nights when the sky seemed endless, filled with thick clouds that rolled like smoke across the horizon. Officer Daniel Harris guided his cruiser slowly along the winding road, his headlights slicing through the mist. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Rex, his German shepherd partner, ears erect, eyes sharp, breathing steady, as if tuned into some invisible rhythm that only he could sense. The radio crackled with static before a dispatcher's voice broke through. "Unit 12, we've had multiple calls about an abandoned SUV parked near the woods off County Line Road. Possible hazard. Please investigate." Daniel tapped the steering wheel with 2 fingers, acknowledging. "Copy that," he answered, his voice even. He turned his gaze briefly toward Rex, who shifted and pressed his nose against the glass. The dog was restless tonight, though Daniel had yet to understand why. As they neared the reported location, Daniel slowed the cruiser to a crawl. Through the drizzle, he spotted the SUV, dark, hulking, and oddly placed along the shoulder, tilted slightly as if abandoned in a hurry. Its windows were clouded, a film of dirt and rain masking the interior. Something about the sight pricked at Daniel's instincts. He had seen plenty of abandoned vehicles in his career, but this one felt different. The night air carried a strange stillness when he stepped out of the cruiser. The smell of wet earth mixed with gasoline fumes from the SUV's aging body. Rex leapt down beside him, muscles tense, nose twitching. The storm had dulled most sounds, yet the silence around the vehicle seemed heavier than the rain itself. Daniel crouched low, shining his flashlight along the SUV's tires, then swept the beam across its windows. No immediate movement, no sign of anyone inside. Still, the feeling gnawed at him. He glanced at Rex, who was sniffing the damp ground with a sharpness that made Daniel's chest tighten. It was in moments like this that his past crept back, flashes of another stormy night years ago, another desperate call for help he hadn't reached in time. That failure lingered like a scar beneath his uniform, one he never spoke of but never forgot. He clenched his jaw, forcing his focus back to the present. From the road, the occasional hiss of passing tires echoed in the distance, but here by the SUV it felt as though they were sealed away in their own pocket of uncertainty. Daniel placed a palm on the hood of the vehicle. Cold. The car had been here for a while. "Something's off, buddy," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. Rex's ears flicked back as if in agreement, then forward again, alert, sharp. In towns like this, folks were quick to shrug off strange details. Maybe a traveler ran out of gas and walked away. Maybe it was just another forgotten car, one of dozens reported every month. But Daniel's gut told him otherwise. He could almost hear the echoes of the dispatcher's words, abandoned SUV ringing with a weight far heavier than routine. This was not just about checking a box on his patrol sheet. This was about the tug inside him, that mix of instinct and regret pushing him to stay vigilant when others might dismiss the signs. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me pause for a moment. If you find yourself drawn in by mysteries like this one, true stories of survival, instinct, and unexpected heroism, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. It's the best way to stay connected with us and never miss the next gripping journey we share. Daniel exhaled slowly, stepping back to survey the SUV once more. His pulse steadied, but the knot in his chest remained. Something was waiting to be uncovered here, and Rex, still pacing with restless focus, seemed to sense it even more than he did. The rain thickened, streaking down the glass of the SUV until it almost blurred from sight. Yet Daniel knew this night had just begun. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and squared his shoulders, the storm pressing against him, a weight he refused to let slow him down. Daniel circled the SUV slowly, water dripping from the brim of his cap, his flashlight beam sliding across the soaked surface of the vehicle. The rain had eased into a drizzle, yet the air still held the chill of an unforgiving storm. Rex stayed close, paws splashing lightly in shallow puddles, his nose pressed near the seams of the doors. The dog's concentration was unshakable, as if the vehicle itself carried a story he was determined to uncover. Daniel tugged gently at the driver's side handle. Locked. He moved to the back seat, same result. The windows were smeared with dirt and streaked with condensation, obscuring whatever might be inside. He bent closer, shielding the beam of his flashlight against the glass, but all he could make out were vague shapes, shadows that told him nothing definite. Behind him, gravel crunched. A second patrol car pulled up, lights off, engine rumbling low. Deputy Miller stepped out, pulling his hood over his head. Miller was younger, sharp-eyed but cautious to a fault, a man who clung to regulations like they were armor. "What do we got?" Miller asked, his voice carrying a casual skepticism. Daniel straightened. "Abandoned SUV, windows are fogged, doors locked. Doesn't sit right with me." Miller cast a glance at the vehicle, then shrugged. "Looks like someone just ditched it. Happens all the time out here." Rex barked once, sharp and insistent, startling Miller. The deputy frowned, tightening his grip on his flashlight. "Your dog always this jumpy?" Daniel shook his head. "Not without reason." For a moment, Miller studied him, then stepped closer to the SUV, peering through the front windshield. "I don't see anything. No movement." "No hazard. Protocol says we log it, tag it, and move on." Daniel's jaw tightened. Protocol. That word had haunted him before. What if someone's in there? Miller raised an eyebrow. Then we'd see them, wouldn't we? No broken glass, no signs of a struggle, just an old car in the rain. Daniel knelt beside the rear tire, sweeping the beam along the mud. He saw only tracks blurred by water, nothing distinct. Still, Rex sniffed at the seams with growing urgency, his body rigid. Daniel's gut twisted. Instinct told him something wasn't right. "You're letting your imagination get ahead of you," Miller said, his tone carrying both irritation and unease. "We can't just bust in because your dog barks." Daniel looked up at him, rain dripping down his cheek. "Rex doesn't bark without cause. I've worked with him long enough to know that." Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. "You always push like this. Not every vehicle's a crime scene." The words stung because they touched a nerve. Daniel remembered the case that had broken him years ago, the one where waiting for backup had cost lives. He forced the memory down, but the echo remained, gnawing at the edge of his mind. Rex whined softly, pawing at the rear door. The sound pierced the night, fragile but insistent. Daniel's heart thudded harder. He pressed his hand against the cold glass again, staring into the vague blur inside. Nothing. Yet the silence, the stillness, it all screamed that something more lay beneath the surface. Miller crossed his arms. "Look, I'll file the report. If something comes up, the sheriff will handle it. Until then, we can't do more." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He studied the SUV one last time, then glanced at Rex, whose tail stiffened as he pressed against the door with renewed urgency. The weight of Miller's words clashed with the pull of his own instincts, leaving him caught between duty and doubt. In that moment, with rain dripping steadily from the branches above and the SUV looming like a silent sentinel, Daniel realized he was standing at a crossroads. To walk away would mean obeying the rules. To stay would mean following the voice inside him, the voice that had been wrong once before but which tonight felt unshakably certain. And Rex, with his unyielding focus, made it clear that turning away was no longer an option. Rex's body stiffened like a drawn bowstring, his nose pressed against the rear door of the SUV. He barked sharply, then clawed at the seam, nails scraping against wet metal. Each movement carried an urgency Daniel had seen before, the kind that meant his partner wasn't simply curious, but certain. Daniel's pulse quickened. He crouched beside Rex, studying him closely. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own voice trembled with unease. Rex growled low, the sound rumbling through the rain-soaked air. Deputy Miller shook his head, unimpressed. "It's an abandoned car. He's picking up old food wrappers, or maybe the scent of an animal, nothing unusual." Daniel shot him a look. "No. This is different." He reached out, resting a hand on Rex's back, feeling the taut muscles beneath the fur. "He's telling us something," Miller scoffed. "You and your gut feelings. Look, I respect the bond you've got with that dog, but barking doesn't equal probable cause. We can't go breaking into people's cars because he's restless." Daniel stood, his rain-soaked uniform clinging to him. "Rex doesn't make mistakes like this. Not once in 5 years. His voice sharpened, conviction cutting through the drizzle. The dog barked again, louder, tail stiff, chest pressed to the door as though he might throw himself through it. Miller flinched at the sound, irritation flashing across his face. "You're letting him wind you up. For all we know, the owner left a sandwich inside before walking off. That's enough to keep a dog interested for hours." Daniel ignored the jab. His flashlight beam slid across the glass again, the condensation still too thick to reveal anything. He pressed harder, straining to see even the faintest sign of movement. Nothing. And yet, Rex wouldn't back away. Inside Daniel, a memory surfaced of a late-night call years earlier, a car found in a ditch. He had waited for backup, followed the book, and by the time they'd acted, it had been too late. The faces from that night still haunted him, surfacing in quiet moments he could never escape. He clenched his jaw now, determined not to repeat history. "Protocols don't always save lives," Daniel muttered, more to himself than Miller. Miller crossed his arms, frustration hardening his tone. "And breaking them can end careers. Think about what you're risking here. One mistake, and you'll be the one answering to the sheriff, not your dog." Rex barked again, the sound echoing off the trees. Daniel crouched low, meeting the dog's eyes. They were bright, burning with determination. He felt the weight of trust pressing on him, the kind of trust built through endless hours of training, through patrols in the dead of night, through moments when instinct had been their only guide. "I trust you," Daniel whispered. When he stood again, Miller's gaze was sharp, questioning. "So what now? You're going to smash the window because your dog says so?" Daniel took a slow breath. The rain ticked against the metal roof of the SUV, steady as a heartbeat. "Not yet, but I'm not walking away either." Miller muttered under his breath, annoyed. "You're going to get yourself written up for this obsession." "Then so be it," Daniel replied firmly. His hand rested on Rex's collar, steadying him. The German shepherd whined, pouring harder at the door. The drizzle thickened, dampening their clothes, and the forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Miller shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to leave, while Daniel's focus only sharpened. He had no proof yet, only Rex's insistence and his own instincts, but both told him the same thing. Something was inside that SUV. Daniel moved away from the SUV, scanning the ground with careful eyes, the flashlight beam slicing through the curtain of drizzle. The mud was slick, churned in places, as if someone had lingered here longer than a broken-down motorist would. Rex followed, nose low, his every breath deliberate. Something caught Daniel's attention near the rear tire, a faint scrap of fabric soaked and clinging to the wet ground. He crouched, pinching it between his fingers. It was pale, patterned faintly with cartoon characters, the sort of design children wore. His chest tightened. Miller leaned closer, unimpressed. Could have been there for weeks. "Doesn't mean anything." Daniel shook his head, examining the threadbare piece under the light. "No, this hasn't been here long. The rain would have worn it down more. Someone dropped this recently." Rex whined, circling around the vehicle, his nose pressing against the soil again. Suddenly, he darted toward the edge of the tree line, where the mud grew thicker beneath fallen leaves. Daniel followed quickly, his boots sinking. The dog pawed at the ground, uncovering a small trail of discarded wrappers. Daniel picked one up, a granola bar, torn open, soggy but not fully deteriorated. He turned it in his hand, his gut tightening further. Someone was eating here. Miller sighed, rain dripping off his hood. "So?" A driver breaks down, snacks while waiting for help, walks away. Case closed. Daniel rose to his feet, staring at him with restrained intensity. "Then where are they? No tow report, no call to dispatch, no footprints leading away to the main road. Doesn't add up." He turned back toward the SUV, pressing his face close to the window again. His own reflection glared back, rain streaking across the glass. And then, faint, almost invisible, he spotted a smeared print, a tiny handprint pressed against the fogged window. His breath caught. "Look at this," Daniel said, motioning Miller over. The deputy bent reluctantly, squinting at the glass. "Could be condensation," Miller muttered, but his voice lacked the certainty it had carried before. "It's a child's hand," Daniel insisted. "Small, pressed hard." "That's not nothing." The night closed in tighter around them, the rain falling harder, pattering against their shoulders. Daniel's heart pounded as memories surged. The day his younger brother disappeared in a wreck miles from town, lost until it was too late. He remembered his father's hollow eyes when they got the news, the silence that fell over their home. That guilt had followed Daniel into every patrol, every decision, and now, staring at the evidence in front of him, the echoes of that night burned hotter. Rex barked again, sharp and urgent, as if sensing Daniel's shift in focus. He pawed at the glass, nose smearing against it, his body language screaming of presence inside. Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Look, even if you're right, we can't just assume. We need a warrant before we force entry, you know that." Daniel turned on him, frustration bleeding into his words. "And how long does that take? Hours? A day? If someone's in there, they don't have that kind of time." The deputy glanced at the ground, unwilling to meet his eyes. "I get it, but my hands are tied." "Yours should be too," Daniel exhaled, fighting the urge to shout. The evidence felt undeniable. The fabric, the wrappers, the handprint. Each piece stacked against the illusion of abandonment. But rules loomed like a wall between instinct and action. The drizzle turned to a steadier rain, soaking through their uniforms. Rex pressed harder against the SUV, nails scraping, his growl vibrating through the night. Daniel ran a hand down his partner's back, steadying him, though inside his resolve burned hotter. This wasn't coincidence. The pieces were forming a picture, and Daniel couldn't ignore it. The SUV wasn't just a forgotten car, it was something else, something waiting to be uncovered. By the time Daniel filed his report, the storm had grown harsher, rattling against the station windows like an impatient visitor. He sat at his desk, soaked uniform clinging to him, writing down every detail, the scrap of fabric, the food wrappers, the faint handprint on the glass, and above all Rex's relentless signals. His handwriting pressed harder than usual into the paper, the pen nearly tearing through the page. Across the room, Sheriff Collins read the report with a slow shake of his head. A heavy-set man with decades of service, Collins prided himself on sticking to procedure. His office was lined with plaques and commendations, but his eyes held little patience for stories without tangible proof. "So you've given me scraps, Harris," Collins said flatly. "Nothing in this indicates imminent danger. Could be coincidence, could be your imagination." Daniel leaned forward. "With all due respect, Sheriff, it's not imagination. I've seen this before. Rex doesn't fixate like that unless there's something real. And that handprint, it's a child's." Collins sighed, setting the paper down. "I don't doubt your commitment, son, but we don't bust into locked vehicles without a warrant. That's the law. We've been sued before for less. You understand that?" Miller, standing off to the side, chimed in with a hint of smugness. "I told him the same thing. He's pushing too hard on this one." Daniel shot him a look, frustration simmering. "If someone's trapped in that car, every minute counts." "Are we really going to waste time waiting for paperwork?" Collins leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "That's how it works. Warrants exist for a reason. I'll send the request through, but until we have it in hand, you stay put. No forced entry. That's an order." The words settled like lead in Daniel's chest. He wanted to argue, to pound the desk and shout that the rules were wrong, but he knew how that would end. His career had already weathered one storm of poor judgment years ago, and Collins never forgot. Rex lay at Daniel's feet, restless even inside the station, ears flicking at every sound, a soft whine escaping his throat. Daniel glanced down, the dog's agitation mirroring his own. He bent to scratch behind Rex's ear, muttering under his breath, "We can't just sit here, can we?" Collins's voice cut through the moment. "I know you care, Harris. I know your history too. But don't let the past cloud your judgment now. Not every abandoned car hides a tragedy. Sometimes it's just a car." The mention of his past felt like a slap. Daniel clenched his fists under the desk, forcing himself to breathe evenly. His younger brother's memory hung just out of reach, a shadow he couldn't escape, and Collins's reminder only deepened the sting. Miller shifted, clearly eager to move on. "So, what do you want us to do in the meantime? Keep checking on a parked SUV while the rest of the county goes unpatrolled?" Collins shook his head. Log the location. Patrols can swing by occasionally, but nothing more until we get authorization. Daniel stared at the sheriff, disbelief flickering across his face. And if there are kids in there? If they don't make it through the night? The sheriff's gaze hardened. That responsibility doesn't fall on you, it falls on the law. Do your job, Harris. Nothing more, nothing less. The rain hammered harder against the glass, drowning the silence that followed. Daniel rose slowly, Rex following him, the weight of the order pressing down on his shoulders. He felt like a man chained by rules when instinct demanded freedom. As he stepped out of the office, Miller's voice trailed behind him, smug but uneasy. I told you. You're chasing ghosts. Daniel didn't answer. His gut screamed otherwise, and so did Rex, but for now the walls of procedure held them back. The next morning the storm had left the town soaked and grey, puddles collecting along the edges of Main Street. Daniel sat in his cruiser outside Johnson's truck stop, sipping bitter coffee from a paper cup. Rex curled in the passenger seat with his head on his paws. Sleep had been shallow and restless, broken by thoughts of the SUV and the ghostly outline of that small handprint on the glass. Inside the diner, the smell of bacon and fried potatoes filled the air. Daniel slid into a booth across from Carl Johnson, a long-haul trucker with a face weathered by the road. Carl had been driving the stretch near County Line Road for years and knew its rhythms better than most. You see that SUV before? Daniel asked, his voice low but direct. Carl leaned back, stroking his beard. Yeah, a few days ago, maybe 4. Wasn't sure. Figured somebody broke down and called for a tow. I passed by plenty of cars like that, didn't think twice. Daniel tapped the table lightly, his frustration showing. And no one came back for it? Carl shook his head. Not that I saw. Rain was bad that night. Roads get lonely out there. Could be anything. The conversation was interrupted by the clatter of plates as a waitress, Anna, brought over a fresh pot of coffee. She was young, with tired eyes from the early shift, but she perked up at the mention of the SUV. You talking about that dark one by the woods? She asked, curiosity lacing her tone. Daniel looked at her sharply. You know it? Anna hesitated, then set the pot down. Couple days ago I had a woman come in here with 2 kids. She looked worn out, kept checking her phone like she was waiting for someone. I remember because one of the little ones left a toy car on the counter. I kept it in the lost and found box. Daniel's pulse quickened. What did she look like? Anna thought for a moment. Early 30s maybe, long brown hair, kind eyes, but she seemed scared. Kept asking about directions, said her GPS wasn't working right. They ordered grilled cheese and hot chocolate, then left in a hurry. I didn't see them again. Rex lifted his head at the sound of Anna's voice, ears twitching as if he too understood the significance. Daniel leaned closer. And this was how many days ago? 3, maybe 4, Anna said, worry creeping into her expression. Why? Is something wrong? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He felt the weight of the puzzle pieces settling into place, the SUV, the child's handprint, the food wrappers in the woods, and now the memory of a mother and her children vanishing after a stop at this very diner. His gut tightened further. Carl broke the silence. You think they're still in that car, don't you? Daniel met his eyes. I don't think. I know something's not right. Anna pressed her hands together, concern deepening. If they're in trouble, somebody needs to do something. Daniel nodded, though his voice carried a heaviness. That's what I'm trying to do. The problem was the sheriff's office wasn't moving fast enough. Red tape and regulations had slowed everything down, and every hour felt like another brick closing in around the truth. But with Carl's testimony and Anna's recollection, Daniel now had more than just instinct. He had witnesses. As he left the diner, Rex walked proudly at his side, tail low but steady, as if sensing they had made progress. Daniel knew it wasn't enough yet, not for the sheriff, not for the courts, but it was something solid, and it meant he wasn't chasing shadows anymore. He opened the cruiser door, glancing once more at the damp clouds rolling over the town. We're not done, boy, he whispered to Rex. Not even close. By the afternoon, the storm had returned with a vengeance. Sheets of rain lashed the county roads, and the air carried the raw bite of early winter. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter as his cruiser approached the familiar stretch where the SUV sat waiting. His wipers fought the downpour, but the view ahead remained a blur of grey and shadow. Rex stood with his paws on the passenger-side window, his nose fogging the glass as if urging Daniel to hurry. The dog's restlessness had grown worse since the diner, his body a coil of tension. Daniel felt it too, a gnawing urgency that pressed harder with every mile. When they arrived, the SUV was still there, exactly as before. Rainwater streamed off its roof, spilling in rivulets down the sides. The windows were darker now, obscured by layers of condensation and grime. The sight twisted Daniel's gut. If people were inside, the conditions alone were unbearable. He parked a short distance away and stepped out, his boots sinking into the mud. Rex leapt down beside him, straining toward the vehicle. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter against the cold wind and approached, scanning the tree line. No movement, no sign of anyone coming back. Just the SUV, silent as a tomb. Rex barked once, sharp, then pressed himself against the rear door again. His claws raked at the metal, desperation in every sound. Daniel crouched low, his breath clouding in the cold air as he pressed his ear to the glass. For a long moment, there was only the storm, the hiss of rain, the groan of branches. Then faintly a tap, so soft he almost doubted it. He froze, heart thudding, straining to hear again. Another tap, then silence. Daniel jerked back, eyes wide. "There's someone inside." His voice cracked in the storm, swallowed by the rain, but Rex's growl told him the dog heard it too. Yet doubt clawed at him. Could it have been a branch? A trick of the storm? The fear of repeating old mistakes warred with the dread of ignoring the truth. His memory dragged him backward, to the night when hesitation had cost lives. He couldn't live through that again. He pressed his hands against the glass, peering harder, but the fog revealed nothing. He circled the vehicle, checking every angle, every seam. The sound did not return. Behind him, the radio crackled with routine chatter from other units, men handling mundane calls across the county. No one else was here. No one else could hear what he had. He was alone with Rex and his instincts. Rex pawed harder, whining now, the sound almost pleading. Daniel crouched beside him, running a hand along the dog's back. "I know, boy." "I heard it too." But Miller's voice echoed in his head. "You're chasing ghosts, and Collins's warning. That responsibility doesn't fall on you. It falls on the law. The law wanted patience. Instinct demanded action." Daniel's fists curled. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the storm hammer against the car, and with it came the relentless thought. What if someone was dying inches away, waiting for him to decide? His radio hissed again with static, and a dispatcher's voice broke through, calling units for a traffic incident miles away. He ignored it, gaze locked on the SUV. Every second stretched like a weight, pulling him deeper into the conflict. He whispered to Rex, almost to himself, "If they're in there, we're running out of time." The dog's ears twitched, his steady breathing the only answer Daniel needed. The SUV loomed before them, mute and sealed, yet alive with the possibility of hidden lives trapped inside. The urgency was no longer a question. It was a ticking clock. The storm lingered into the next day, grey clouds hanging low over the town like a weight no one could shake. Daniel stood inside the precinct, his uniform still damp, the memory of the faint tapping from the SUV gnawing at him. Rex sat by his side, restless, eyes fixed on the door as though urging him to leave. Deputy Miller leaned against a filing cabinet, arms crossed, watching Daniel with thinly veiled irritation. "You're obsessed, Harris. You stood out there in the rain listening to a car. You know how that sounds?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know what I heard." Miller shook his head, smirking. "You've been chasing shadows ever since that case years ago. Everyone knows it. You think you're going to redeem yourself by finding ghosts in an abandoned SUV?" The words cut deep, but Daniel refused to let Miller see it. He stared at him with a cold steadiness. "This isn't about me. It's about whoever's in that car." Before Miller could answer, the office door creaked open. Emily, Daniel's wife, stood in the doorway, her umbrella dripping with rain. She wore a look he knew all too well, worry mixed with exhaustion from living with his constant battles between rules and instinct. "I've been calling," she said softly, eyes flicking to Rex before returning to Daniel. "You didn't come home last night." "I couldn't," Daniel replied, his voice rough. "There's something going on with that vehicle." "I can't let it go." Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You've done this before. You get caught up and the rest of the world disappears. Me, the kids, we're left waiting while you chase after something no one else believes in." Her words twisted inside him. He wanted to explain, to make her feel what he felt standing in the rain, hearing that faint tap, seeing Rex's unshakable focus. But how could he? She hadn't been there. "I can't walk away," he whispered. "Not this time." Emily's expression softened but carried sadness. "And what if you're wrong again? How many chances do you think you have before it breaks you for good?" The room fell silent except for the low hum of the overhead lights. Rex shifted, ears twitching, picking up on the tension. Daniel looked down at his partner, the one being who seemed to understand without needing words. Miller broke the silence with a scoff. "See? Even your wife thinks you're losing it. Maybe you should listen to her." Daniel turned sharply, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think this is a game? You think Rex is barking at shadows? You didn't see that handprint." "You didn't hear what I heard." Miller's smirk faltered, but he masked it with a shrug. "All I see is a cop about to throw his career away because he can't let go of the past." The air between them grew heavier, thick with unspoken tension. Emily reached for Daniel's hand, her touch light but pleading. "Please, just come home tonight, just for one night." "Let it rest." Daniel met her gaze, torn between the weight of her concern and the pull of the SUV that haunted his thoughts. He wanted to promise her peace, to say he would leave it alone. But the words refused to form. Instead, he pulled away gently, his voice quiet but unyielding. "I have to see this through." Emily's shoulders sagged, her eyes shining with disappointment. Without another word, she turned and walked out, the door shutting softly behind her. Rex whined, pressing against Daniel's leg. He rested a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself. The path ahead was clear, even if it meant walking it alone. The precinct buzzed with the usual rhythm of dispatch calls and radio chatter when the clerk from records hurried into the room, a thin stack of papers clutched in her hands. She looked toward Sheriff Collins, then at Daniel, hesitant before speaking. "A missing persons report just came through from the state police database. Thought you'd want to see it." Collins waved her over, brows furrowed as he scanned the document. His expression tightened, and for once, the unshakable certainty in his eyes dimmed. "Laura Parker," he read aloud, his tone slower than usual. 32 years old, reported missing with her 2 children, ages 7 and 9, last seen 4 days ago. Daniel's stomach dropped. He stepped forward, pulling the paper from the sheriff's hands. The description matched the woman Anna had remembered from the diner, the anxious mother with long brown hair, clutching her children close. "They were driving a dark SUV, the clerk added. "License plate matches the one you logged yesterday, Harris." The room went still. Miller shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance fading. "Wait, you're saying that car—" His voice trailed off, eyes darting between the sheriff and Daniel. Daniel gripped the report so tightly the edges curled in his hands. "I knew it," he muttered, his pulse racing. He turned sharply toward Collins. "That SUV isn't just abandoned. That family is in there." Collins rubbed his forehead, clearly rattled. "Easy. We don't know they're still inside." "They could have left it behind." Daniel slammed the paper against the desk. "Then where are they? 4 days missing, 2 children unaccounted for, and their vehicle sitting on a county road. You think that's coincidence?" Miller's voice was quieter now, stripped of confidence. "We checked it, there was nothing visible." Daniel shot him a glare. "Nothing visible doesn't mean nothing there. Rex knew. He's been telling us all along." He gestured at his partner, who sat alert, eyes locked on him as if waiting for the command to move. Collins exhaled heavily, pacing a few steps. "Damn it. If this matches, then we've been sitting on a potential rescue for days." Daniel felt a surge of vindication but no satisfaction. The urgency pressed harder now, heavier than ever. We can't waste another hour. Every minute counts. The sheriff hesitated, torn between his lifelong devotion to procedure and the evidence staring him in the face. Finally, he muttered, "I'll call the judge. Push the warrant through faster." "Faster," Daniel snapped. "Sheriff, those kids might not have faster left." His voice cracked under the weight of his words, the desperation raw. "I heard tapping from inside that car." "I'm telling you, they're still there." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You're certain?" Daniel met his gaze, unwavering. "As certain as I've ever been about anything in my life." The silence stretched, broken only by the rain against the windows. Collins finally looked away, his voice gruff. "Get your gear ready. If that warrant comes through, you'll be the first one on site." Daniel nodded, his heart hammering. Though inside, another voice whispered, "What if it doesn't come through in time?" Miller shifted again, guilt flickering across his face. "Harris," he began, his tone softer. "If you're right, I should have listened sooner." Daniel didn't respond. There was no time for apologies. The picture of the missing family was burned into his mind. The worried mother, the children's small hands. He felt the weight of their lives pressing on him, demanding action. Rex rose to his feet, tail stiff, body poised, as if sensing that the moment they had been waiting for was finally here. Daniel reached down, resting a steady hand on his partner's head. "We're not stopping now," he whispered. For the first time in days, the truth was no longer just his burden. It was undeniable. The SUV was no longer a mystery. It was the key to saving a family. The storm had thinned into a steady drizzle by the time Daniel and Rex reached the SUV again. The trees around the road dripped with rainwater, their branches heavy and bowed, while the vehicle itself sat like a sealed vault, silent and unyielding. Daniel's chest ached with the weight of every hour lost. He circled the car once more, flashlight beams sliding across its rain-slicked surface. Nothing had changed. The same fogged windows, the same locked doors. Yet Rex pressed against the trunk, claws scraping, body rigid with determination. The dog barked once, sharp and urgent, then looked back at Daniel as if demanding, "Now." Daniel knew the sheriff's warrant was still pending. Maybe it would arrive within the hour, maybe longer. But his gut screamed that waiting wasn't an option anymore. His radio crackled with Collins's voice. "Harris, hold your position until we have the paperwork. Do not take action without clearance. That's an order." Daniel stared at the SUV, fists clenched, his breath fogged in the cold air. Then he lifted the radio slowly, pressing the button. His voice was calm, but his pulse hammered. "Copy, Sheriff." He clipped the radio back to his belt without another word. Rex barked again, louder this time, pounding his paws against the trunk. Daniel crouched beside him, pressing a hand to his fur. "I hear you," he whispered. "We're not leaving them in there." He rose and walked back to the cruiser, opening the trunk. The emergency kit lay inside, flares, a pry bar, and a small axe. He hesitated only for a moment before gripping the bar, the cold metal grounding him in his decision. Miller's voice echoed in his memory. "You're going to throw your career away. And Emily's too. What if you're wrong again?" But those voices were drowned by another, the faint tapping he had heard against the glass, a sound that had burned into his mind and refused to fade. Daniel approached the SUV again, rain dripping from his cap. He wedged the bar against the seam of the trunk and pushed with all his weight. The metal groaned, resisting, then gave slightly, his muscles strained, sweat mixing with the rain on his forehead. Rex barked furiously, tail stiff, urging him on. The lock snapped with a sharp crack. Daniel pulled the trunk upward, the hinges screaming in protest until the seal finally broke. A rush of damp, stale air spilled out, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of human presence. Sweat, fear, and exhaustion mingled in the suffocating space. For a heartbeat there was silence, then a faint voice, hoarse and trembling, "Help." Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was small, fragile, but real. He leaned closer, his flashlight beam sweeping across the cramped interior. Two pairs of eyes blinked weakly against the light. Children, pale and thin, their faces streaked with tears. Beside them, a woman stirred, lips dry, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Please, we're here." Emotions surged through Daniel like a flood. "You're safe now," he said, voice thick with relief. "We've got you." Rex barked again, his tail wagging furiously now, the urgency replaced with triumph. The dog nudged forward, as if to assure the family that help had finally come. Daniel dropped the bar and pulled his radio free. His voice was firm, unshakable. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I have survivors." "Repeat. Survivors located inside the SUV. Request immediate medical assistance at County Line Road." Static filled the air before the dispatcher responded, her voice cracking with urgency. "Copy. Unit 12. Sending units now." Daniel looked back into the trunk, his chest tight. The family was alive but frail, hanging on by a thread. He reached in, his hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. For the first time in years, the weight of failure lifted. Instinct had been right. Rex had been right. They had found them in time. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the storm, growing louder as flashing lights painted the wet road. Daniel stayed crouched by the SUV, his hand steady on the trunk lid, keeping it open while his flashlight illuminated the frail faces inside. The children's lips were cracked, their eyes glazed with exhaustion, but they clung to their mother as though she were the last anchor holding them to the world. "Hold on," Daniel said softly, his voice breaking against the lump in his throat. "Help's here. You're safe now." Rex pressed forward, his nose brushing the children's hands. They stirred weakly, one of them whispering, "Our doggy." It was a fragile sound, but it brought a rush of warmth to Daniel's chest. The first paramedic rushed up, kneeling beside him. "How many?" "3, Daniel answered quickly. "Mother and 2 kids. Severe dehydration. Possible hypothermia." "They've been trapped for days." The paramedic signaled his team, and within moments stretchers and medical kits surrounded the SUV. Daniel stepped back just enough to let them work, but his eyes never left the family. He watched as gentle hands lifted the children out, wrapping them in thermal blankets, checking their pulses, slipping oxygen masks over their tiny faces. Their mother resisted at first, clutching at them, her voice raw. "Don't take them, please, don't take them from me." Daniel crouched beside her, meeting her panicked gaze. "They're not taking them away, they're helping. You're all together. I promise." Her breathing steadied, though her eyes still darted with fear. One of the paramedics touched Daniel's shoulder. "She needs fluids immediately." "She's weak, but she's holding on." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. "Do whatever it takes." As the children were carried to the ambulance, Rex trotted beside them, tail wagging gently, his presence calming. One of the kids reached out with trembling fingers to touch his fur, their lips curling into the faintest smile. Daniel felt his throat tighten at the sight. Laura Parker, the mother, clutched his wrist as they prepared to move her. Her voice was barely audible, rasping with gratitude. You didn't give up." Daniel squeezed her hand firmly. Neither did Rex. Her eyes filled with tears as they lifted her onto the stretcher. She mouthed the words "thank you" before the paramedics wheeled her away. The scene blurred for Daniel, not from the rain but from the rush of emotions he had fought to keep buried. For so long he had carried the weight of failure, the memory of lives he hadn't saved. But now, in the glow of flashing lights and the steady hum of medical voices, he felt something shift. The past still lived inside him, but it no longer defined him. Sheriff Collins arrived moments later, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. The stretchers, the children alive, the mother whispering in relief. He approached Daniel slowly, his voice low. "You went against orders." Daniel straightened, rain dripping from his cap, his hands still trembling. "If I'd waited, they'd be dead." The sheriff stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled heavily. "We'll talk about the fallout later. Right now, just know, you did the right thing." Miller stood in the background, guilt written all over his face. He couldn't meet Daniel's eyes. For once, the deputy had no words. Rex returned to Daniel's side, shaking water from his coat. His body relaxed now that the mission was over. Daniel knelt, wrapping his arms briefly around the dog's neck. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. "We brought them back." The ambulances pulled away, red lights cutting through the rain as they carried the family toward safety. Daniel stood on the empty road, soaked and exhausted, but lighter than he had felt in years. For the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel like failure. It felt like relief. The following morning, the precinct was anything but calm. Phones rang non-stop, reporters called for statements, and the local news station ran the headline, "K9 officer rescues missing family, found alive in abandoned car." The story spread quickly, and with it came a flood of praise for Rex and his handler. Yet inside the walls of the sheriff's office, celebration was tempered by tension. Sheriff Collins summoned Daniel to his office. The blinds were half closed, casting long slats of light across the cluttered desk. Collins gestured for him to sit, but didn't offer a smile. "You know why you're here." Daniel lowered himself into the chair, his posture straight, jaw set. Rex sat at his side, calm but alert. "You disobeyed a direct order," Collins continued, voice even but stern. "You forced entry without a warrant. That puts this department at risk, legally and professionally. If Parker's family hadn't been in that car, we'd be having a very different conversation." Daniel met his eyes. "But they were in the car, and if I'd waited, they wouldn't have survived." "You know that as well as I do." Collins leaned back, exhaling. "You're not wrong. But the badge doesn't give us freedom to ignore the law whenever we feel like it. We answer to the rules, not our guts." Daniel's hands tightened on his knees. "Sometimes the rules cost lives. Rex knew. I knew. And I wasn't about to let red tape bury them." The sheriff studied him, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "Public opinion isn't against you right now. Quite the opposite. You and Rex are being hailed as heroes. That pressure buys me some room, but don't think it clears you. There will still be an internal review. Suspension is on the table." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll take whatever comes, but I'd make the same call again." Before Collins could respond, Miller stepped into the office, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. He shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Sheriff, if I may, Harris tried to tell me. I didn't listen. I dismissed him. If anyone's at fault for slowing this down, it's me." Daniel turned, surprised by the admission. Miller avoided his gaze, staring at the floor. "I let my pride get in the way. He trusted his partner. I should have trusted mine." The room fell quiet. Collins looked between them, then muttered, "This department doesn't have room for division. Mistakes like this don't just hurt us. They hurt the people we're supposed to protect." Daniel broke the silence. "Then maybe the lesson here is that instinct matters as much as protocol. We can't throw one away for the other." Collins tapped his desk, considering. "Maybe. But don't mistake this outcome for justification. You gambled, Harris. You happened to win. That doesn't make it less of a gamble." The sheriff dismissed them, leaving Daniel and Miller in the hallway. For the first time in weeks, Miller's usual smirk was gone. He scratched the back of his neck. "Look, I'm sorry. You were right. I just didn't want to admit it. And I sure as hell didn't want to admit Rex was smarter than me." Daniel allowed a faint smile. "Rex is smarter than most of us. Don't take it personally." Rex wagged his tail as if in agreement, easing some of the tension between them. As Daniel stepped outside, the crisp air filled his lungs. Reporters gathered at the entrance, cameras flashing, calling his name, asking for comments. He ignored them, letting Rex lead him toward the cruiser. The dog walked proudly head high as though he understood the weight of what they had accomplished. Yet even as praise mounted, Daniel knew the shadow of consequences still loomed. Hero or not, the rules he had broken would not vanish. But for the first time in years, he felt peace in his choice. He had trusted Rex, and together they had saved lives. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft rustle of nurses moving in and out. Daniel stood near the doorway, cap in hand, while Rex lay obediently at his feet. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, but beneath it lingered something warmer. Hope, fragile, but present. Laura Parker lay propped against the pillows, her face pale yet calmer than when Daniel had first seen her in the SUV. Her children sat curled on either side of her, wrapped in blankets, their eyes still tired, but brighter now. When she noticed Daniel, her expression softened, and she motioned weakly for him to come closer. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice raspy but steadier than before. "You and Rex, you saved us." Daniel shook his head gently. "You saved yourselves by holding on. We just helped finish the fight." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she reached to smooth her daughter's hair. "We tried. God, we tried. The car broke down on our way to my sister's. My phone died, and then the storm hit. I thought we'd be able to walk for help the next morning, but the rain washed out the road. I couldn't risk the kids getting lost in the woods." She paused, swallowing hard. "So we stayed. I thought someone would come, but the days passed, and no one did." Her son lifted his head, speaking softly. "Mom gave us the crackers and juice first. She said she wasn't hungry, but she was." Laura's lips trembled. "I rationed what we had. A couple of granola bars, a bottle of water from the glove box. When that was gone, I melted ice from the roof in a cup. It wasn't enough, but it kept us alive." Daniel listened in silence, his throat tightening. Every detail painted a clearer picture of their ordeal: days of fear, hunger, and the suffocating air inside the locked SUV. "There were moments," Laura admitted, her voice breaking, "when I thought no one would find us. The kids would cry at night, and I had nothing left to give them but words. I told them stories, made promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But I couldn't let them see how scared I was." Daniel leaned closer, his voice low. "You were stronger than you realize. Most people wouldn't have lasted as long." Her daughter whispered, barely audible, "We heard noises outside sometimes, but no one came." Laura nodded. "Cars passed, but the windows were too fogged. We tried knocking on the glass, but I guess the storm drowned us out. When Rex barked, I thought maybe it was over. And then when you opened that trunk—" her voice faltered as tears spilled freely. "I'll never forget it." Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name, tail thumping softly against the floor. Laura reached out with a trembling hand, and the dog moved closer, pressing his head into her palm. Her children giggled weakly, touching his fur, their first true smiles since the ordeal began. Daniel felt the lump in his chest tighten. This was why he wore the badge. Not for recognition, not for protocol, but for moments when survival turned into salvation. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "That's what matters. Focus on getting better. Let the rest fall to us." Laura nodded, still stroking Rex's fur. "You've given me back my family. I'll never be able to repay you for that." Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady. "Just live. That's repayment enough." The room grew quiet again, filled with the soft comfort of presence. The storm outside had finally broken, and for the first time in days the family was surrounded not by fear, but by light. A week later, the small town gathered in the community center, its hall filled with the hum of voices and the clatter of folding chairs. Word of the Parker family's rescue had spread beyond the county, drawing reporters, neighbors, and local officials. Banners hung overhead, and in the front row sat Laura with her children, their faces healthier now, though still carrying traces of the ordeal. Daniel stood at the edge of the stage, his uniform crisp, his cap tucked under his arm. Rex sat at his side, calm but alert, eyes sweeping the room. The sheriff stepped to the microphone, clearing his throat as the chatter faded. "Tonight," Sheriff Collins began, "we recognize not only bravery but instinct, the kind of instinct that saves lives when every second matters. Officer Harris and his canine partner Rex reminded us that the bond between a handler and his dog is more than just training. It's trust, and in this case that trust gave 3 people their second chance." Applause filled the room, warm and thunderous. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, never one for the spotlight, but Rex's tail thumped against the floor, soaking in the praise without hesitation. The sheriff continued, "For his service, Rex is awarded the Medal of Valor, the highest honor this department can bestow on one of our own. An officer stepped forward with a small box, opening it to reveal the medal. Daniel knelt as Rex was fitted with the ribbon, the medal glinting under the lights. The room erupted again with cheers, children clapping loudest of all. Laura stood, her voice carrying above the noise. "You didn't just save us. You gave my children back their future. I'll never forget what you did." Daniel felt his chest tighten, his throat thick with emotion. He gave a small nod in return, unable to summon words strong enough to match her gratitude. After the ceremony, Miller approached him near the back of the hall. His posture was stiff, his tone awkward but sincere. "You were right, Harris, about all of it. I didn't want to admit it, but you trusted Rex when I wouldn't trust anything I couldn't see. I owe you an apology." Daniel studied him for a moment, then offered a hand. "What matters is that family's alive. Learn from it, and we move forward." Miller shook his hand firmly, relief crossing his face. Fair enough. Later that night, when the hall had emptied and the applause faded into memory, Daniel walked with Emily along the quiet street outside. The cool night air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the glow of streetlights pooled on the pavement. For the first time in weeks, the weight between them felt lighter. "You looked proud up there," Emily said softly. Daniel chuckled, glancing down at Rex trotting ahead. "Rex stole the show. I was just the guy holding the leash." She smiled faintly, but her tone grew serious. "I was scared for you, Daniel. Not just that night, but every night you go out there. I see how the past still clings to you, and I'm afraid it'll eat you alive." Daniel stopped, turning to face her. "It did. For a long time. Every mistake, every loss. I carried them like chains. But standing there, seeing that family alive, for once, I don't feel like the past is all I am. I feel like maybe I can forgive myself." Her eyes softened, glistening in the lamplight. She squeezed his hand. "Then maybe I can stop being afraid too." They walked on in silence, but it was a silence filled not with distance, but with peace. Rex barked once, chasing a drifting leaf, his medal glinting under the streetlight. Daniel laughed quietly, the sound surprising even himself. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like possibility. The Parker family returned home under the care of relatives, their lives forever altered, but no longer teetering on the edge of despair. The town followed their recovery closely, neighbors dropping off meals, children from school sending cards, and strangers offering support. For once, the community felt united by hope instead of tragedy. Daniel visited them briefly before they left the hospital. Laura hugged him tightly, her children clutching his hands. "You didn't just save us," she whispered. "You reminded me that there are still people who listen when the world goes silent." Her words etched themselves into his heart, a reminder of why he had chosen this life. Back on patrol, the county roads felt different. Where he once carried the constant weight of failure, he now felt a steadier balance. The past was still there, but it no longer owned him. Rex trotted proudly at his side, the medal on his collar catching the sunlight whenever he moved. To Daniel, it wasn't just an award. It was proof that trusting instinct, trusting his partner, mattered more than fear of being wrong. One evening, while fueling up at the station, Miller approached him with 2 cups of coffee. "Figured I owed you one," he said, handing Daniel the extra cup. His tone was lighter now, his posture less defensive. "Guess I've been doing this job with my head only. Maybe it's time I start using my gut too." Daniel smirked, taking the coffee. "Balance the two, that's the trick." Miller nodded, glancing at Rex. "Think he'd be willing to train me?" Daniel laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound genuine. "You'd have to keep up with him first." At home, Emily noticed the change in him. The lines of worry across his face had softened, replaced with something steadier. As they sat together on the porch one night, she leaned against his shoulder. "You seem lighter," she murmured. "I am," Daniel admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not running from my mistakes, I'm moving past them." She kissed his cheek softly. That's all I ever wanted for you. Rex dozed at their feet, the steady rise and fall of his chest a rhythm that matched Daniel's newfound calm. The days passed, but the lesson of that abandoned SUV lingered. For Daniel, it was proof that sometimes the hardest choice wasn't whether to follow the rules. It was whether to risk everything by listening to the quiet voice inside that said, "Don't walk away." And for Rex, it was simply another mission completed, his loyalty unshaken, his instincts unerring. On their next patrol, Daniel slowed the cruiser near County Line Road. The SUV was gone, the stretch of asphalt empty except for the whisper of wind through the trees. Yet in his mind the echoes remained, the bark, the tapping on glass, the rush of relief when the trunk opened. It was a reminder of what could be lost in hesitation and what could be saved in courage. He glanced at Rex, who sat with his head out the window, ears flicking at the breeze. "We did good, partner," Daniel said softly. "Better than good." Rex barked once, as if in agreement, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Before we close this story, I want to invite you, if you've been gripped by this journey of instinct, survival, and second chances, to subscribe to the channel. These stories matter, and with your support we can keep sharing them. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now to discover another powerful rescue story, because every act of courage has the power to change lives.